Baseball began as an amateur game. It had no other purpose than to please its players, but became a sport that had to please its fans. The proximal cause of this change was the increasing popularity of baseball, while the more distal cause was the rapid urbanization amidst the backdrop of the Industrial Revolution. Baseball can be played anywhere, from wide open fields to bustling city streets. But baseball from the very start was not rural. Ballparks are unique and idiosyncratic. They have to be. They are squeezed into the confines of the city, and they represent them. From inflammable wooden structures to architectural marvels, these hallowed grounds still echo the names of boyhood heroes and games long past. In 1824, decades before the creation of Central Park, Colonel John Stevens offered to sell his land to the city of New York for use as a public park. After rejecting his offer, he decided to turn it into a park on his own. He envisioned a pleasure garden, a recreational place for weary New Yorkers to escape in the summertime from the sweltering heat of the city. 40 years earlier, he purchased an island west of the Hudson River. It was an underdeveloped, mosquito-infested swamp swarming with turtles that some called Turtle Grove. The Lenape, Native Americans in and around Delaware called the place Hoboken, meaning smoking pipe. They used the green-colored soapstone rock abundant in the area to carve pipes for smoking tobacco. Dutch settlers called the area Hobuck, meaning high bluff, referring to Castle Point, a rocky escarpment high above sea level. Eventually, it became named Hoboken. Stevens purchased the land from the city of New Jersey, who'd confiscated it from William Bayard after the Revolutionary War. While originally supporting the Patriots, Bayard became a loyalist after New York came under British control. As recompense, his property was seized and sold at public auction. Stevens purchased this property as well as additional property nearby. With these two real estate purchases, he owned over 700 acres of land, more than a mile of which was along the Hudson River. Stevens was a prominent inventor who designed steam-powered locomotives and ships. To protect his intellectual property, he petitioned the fledgling Congress to legislate on the matter, and in 1790, the first patent statute was enacted in the United States. His 1809 steamboat, the Phoenix, became the first steamship to successfully navigate the open ocean. In 1811, he established the world's first commercial ferry when his ship, the Juliana, began to carry passengers between Manhattan and Hoboken for a fee. His property gained notoriety as a spot for pistol duels. Many other states had banned dueling, so gentlemen from all over traveled to Stevens' property to settle disputes. His estate was the site of the famous 1804 duel between Aaron Burr, the U.S. Vice President, and Alexander Hamilton, former Secretary of the Treasury. That same year, he planned the layout of his burgeoning town, arranging 800 lots in a symmetrical grid throughout the streets of Hoboken. Stevens ventured into real estate speculation while continuing to work on his inventions. In fact, his transportation innovations were often developed to increase the value of his business ventures. He wanted to create a ferry business between New York and his new town, but was hamstrung by local monopolies. For the next 20 years, he tried to sell off property to developers, but was unsuccessful. Eventually, he decided to increase the land value by creating a natural attraction that would entice homebuyers and developers to the area. He envisioned a resort where New Yorkers could come for rest and relaxation. Throughout the 1820s and early 1830s, Stevens drained the swamp and filled nearby marshes. He tamed the wilderness and built a variety of exhibitions to attract visitors. After a decade of work, his estate had become a veritable paradise. Beginning at the ferry landing, there were boating events and races. A series of river walks and shaded paths meandered alongside the riverbank, ascending gently up the hill to the family home atop Castle Point. The sprawling gardens brimmed with acres of fruit trees, vegetables, flowering shrubs, coffee, and exotic plants. He excavated a cave with a natural spring, adorning its entrance with a majestic Gothic-style stone arch. He named it Sibyl's Cave, paying homage to the oracles of ancient Greece. The spring water was said to have medicinal properties, attracting tourists who paid a penny to drink from it. Innovating further, he designed and built a steam locomotive which operated on a track around his estate. Nestled deep within the park stood the Grand Colonnade Hotel. Its pristine facade and regal Doric pillars inspired awe. Adjacent pavilions were erected for special occasions, catering to patrons eager to indulge in drink and good company. There were family picnic areas, amusement rides, and at the heart of it all were grounds for sport. Visitors began to refer to the grounds as the Elysian Fields, a mythical land from Greek mythology where virtuous individuals enjoy a blissful afterlife. The Elysian Fields were a triumphant success. Stevens ferried as many as 20,000 passengers a day during the summer months. The picturesque retreat enticed visitors of all standings. It lured families seeking respite from the hustle and bustle of city life. Young bachelors eager for employment, men and women alike, rich and poor. Everyone turned out to enjoy the myriad festivities. Among the illustrious visitors were literary greats like Charles Dickens, Washington Irving, and Edgar Allan Poe, and statesmen such as Daniel Webster and Martin Van Buren, adding to the prestige of its esteemed reputation. In the golden haze of a summer afternoon, amidst the sprawling expanse of the Elysian Fields, the Knickerbocker Baseball Club played the New York Ball Club. The year was 1846. James K. Polk was president. California had just declared independence from Mexico amidst the Mexican-American War. The Liberty Bell had just cracked a couple months earlier after being rung celebrating Washington's birthday. Players showed up to the game without uniforms, and women attended as spectators, wearing long sleeves, gloves, bonnets, and parasols. Doc Adams laboriously made all the baseballs by hand and scolded players for hitting it too hard so they wouldn't hit it into the Hudson River. The referee, with a piece of chalk behind his ear, kept the very first scorecard in baseball history. The pitcher stood just 45 feet away from home plate and delivered the ball at the batter underhanded. Fly balls could be caught for an out off a single bounce, and the game was played until one team scored 21 runs. The Knickerbockers would lose the match, but history had been made. The very first game of baseball had been played. And for 50 years thereafter, baseball was played in the Elysian Fields by amateurs until purpose-built stadiums and professional baseball players took their place. The National Association of Baseball Players formed in 1857 as the first organization governing baseball. They further clarified the rules of the game, including 9-man teams, 9 innings, and the called strike. One significant rule that was kept in place was that baseball was purely an amateur game. It would remain as such until the late 1860s. In 1858, Brooklyn, a city at the time and not a borough like today, challenged New York to a best 2 out of 3 match. Each city would draft players from the best clubs in the area, effectively creating the first All-Star game. For the site of their big game, they chose a horse track, the Fashion Race Course in Long Island, New York. The sod of the infield was shaved down to the dirt to create a makeshift baseball diamond. The track was just a stone's throw from modern-day Citi Field, where the New York Mets play today. They anticipated a large turnout and for the first time in baseball history, charged admission for the event. More than 7,800 fans turned out for the first game. New York would win the match 2-1. The Fashion Racecourse game, while profitable, had its share of problems. The costly infield sod removal and exorbitant rental fees hurt profit margins. Undeterred, William Kamier, driven by entrepreneurial spirit, sought to profit off baseball as well. Recognizing the impracticability of repurposing a racetrack for the sport, he decided to create the first purpose-built baseball field. Upon receiving a substantial inheritance from his late father, Kamier seized the opportunity to invest in a large pond located in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. He purchased the lot in the fall of 1861, and to make money on his venture before spring, he let the field freeze over to create an ice skating rink. He enclosed the area with a sturdy 8-foot-tall wooden fence and erected a gazebo on the grounds. The 3-story structure rose incongruously amidst the frozen landscape. Lamps were hung on the decorative wooden spandrels, creating a charming spectacle each evening as their light reflected off the ice. The skating rink proved to be a popular attraction, drawing large crowds during the winter months. With the arrival of spring in 1862, the ice thawed, the gazebo stayed. It remained a permanent fixture in the outfield for as long as the field remained. Grandstands were built to accommodate approximately 2,000 fans, providing ample seating for spectators. Additionally, benches were placed far away to offer women a separate area, ensuring their comfort from the more raucous fans. Kamier then undertook the task of preparing the field for baseball. Despite the challenges, he spared no expense in creating a quality playing surface, which soon attracted the attention of local area clubs. In May of 1862, after months of diligent work, the field was ready for its inaugural game. To add a special touch to the event, Kamier arranged for the regimental military band to perform. They played the Star-Spangled Banner, the first time it was played before a ball game. Prior to the Fashion Racecourse game, organizers turned a profit by leasing their fields to teams in exchange for annual dues. The success of the Fashion Racecourse game demonstrated the viability of admission fees, prompting Kamier to adopt this model for his own games. This shift transferred the financial responsibility from team owners to the fans, ushering in a new era in the organization of sporting events. The Union Grounds even witnessed baseball turn from an amateur game to a professional sport. The Cincinnati Red Stockings, the very first professional baseball team, played at the stadium, as did several National League teams. The success of the Union Grounds inspired others to open purpose-built baseball stadiums. The Capitoline Skating Lake and Baseball Grounds opened in 1864 with a similar business model. Both served as multi-purpose stadiums, with baseball in the spring and summer and ice skating in the winter. During a game in 1865 at the Capitoline Grounds, Ned Cuthbert is credited with inventing the slide. While attempting to steal a base, he slid to avoid a tag, marking a significant moment in baseball history. An historic game was played at the Capitoline Grounds in 1870, when the Brooklyn Atlantics defeated the Cincinnati Red Stockings, ending their 89-game win streak. During the Civil War, soldiers played bat and ball games during their downtime. After the war, the soldiers returned home, proliferating the game to their local areas. Baseball had begun as a game with no purpose other than to please its players, but was becoming a game that also had to please spectators. Stadiums were built larger and larger to accommodate more and more fans. The South End Grounds in Boston was built in 1871 and housed just 5,000 fans, while Sportsman Park in St. Louis, built 10 years later, seated over 30,000. The dimensions of ballparks in this era had yet to be standardized either. The Huntington Avenue Grounds in Boston had a center field that stretched to 635 feet for a single season in 1908. In Chicago's Lakeshore Park, the right field fence was just 180 feet from home plate. In 1880, John B. Day, owner of both the New York Metropolitans and New York Gothams, secured a lease for a field from a local polo club to serve as a venue for his team's games. The field, under the ownership of James Gordon Bennett, boasted a newly built double-decked grandstand to accommodate eager fans. However, years of equestrian sport had left the field worn and uneven. Recognizing the need for renovation, Day refurbished the field, a costly yet ultimately successful undertaking. Nevertheless, the dimensions of the playing area remained highly irregular, just 258 feet to the right field wall and 279 feet to the left. To accommodate both teams, Day built a crude, misshapen second baseball diamond in left field for the Mets to play on, while the Gothams played on the nice new diamond. He separated the two fields by a canvas fence and would sometimes schedule 2 professional baseball games at once. Outfielders would sometimes get distracted when the ball from one game would fall into the other playing area. In the late 19th century, baseball underwent a period of remarkable innovation. On September 2, 1880, just a year after Thomas Edison's invention of the light bulb, 2 department store teams took to the field under electric lights, marking the inaugural nighttime baseball game. Meanwhile, in 1888, the Cincinnati Reds became the first major league team to cover its field with a tarp during rain. Amidst these advancements came other pivotal developments. In 1894, a startling 4 Major League Baseball stadiums burned down in a single season. Some fires occurred during games, killing several fans. In 1903, hundreds of fans turned their back on the game to watch a street fight on the opposite side of the stadium, causing the wooden overhang they were standing on to collapse, killing a dozen and injuring over 200. These catastrophes prompted architects to realize the inadequacy of wooden building structures and sought safer and more durable building materials. In 1907, Benjamin Scheib, the president of the Philadelphia Athletics, faced a challenge. The team's current stadium was consistently overfilled. He hired William Steele & Sons to build a new stadium for the team. The construction firm was known for the recent completion of Philadelphia's first steel concrete skyscraper. Spanning the neighborhoods of Swamp Poodle and Goosetown, the resulting park was a feat of cutting-edge engineering. It blended steel, concrete, brick, and terracotta in its design, embodying the archetypal French Renaissance Revival style. From the outside, it looked like a normal building, underscoring the stadium's role not just as a sports venue, but as a community gathering place, worthy of its place alongside museums and civic buildings. Scheib Park opened in 1909 at a cost of $300,000, $10 million adjusted for inflation. Just months later, Forbes Field opened in Pittsburgh as another early steel and concrete stadium. It cost 3 times as much. Owner Barney Dreyfuss hated cheap home runs. He helped designate the distance to the left field fence to 360 feet, 460 feet to center, and 376 to the right field fence. He opted to keep Forbes Field free from advertising billboards, preserving its integrity as a sporting venue. For 60 years, Forbes Field was home to the Pittsburgh Pirates, witnessing iconic moments like Babe Ruth's final home runs, number 712th, 13th, and 14th, all in the same game, 2 All-Star games and 3 World Series victories. Charles Comiskey, a pivotal figure in the development of the American League, also served as the owner and founder of the Chicago White Sox. Inspired by Scheib Park and Forbes Field, he wanted to build a new stadium. He asked their star pitcher Ed Walsh for his input on the design. The result was a pitcher-friendly park, with outfield dimensions of exactly 362 feet on each the left and right field. It was built on a garbage dump far away from downtown. Comiskey cut corners everywhere, rejecting many of his architect's designs. The resulting brick building lacked the character of some of its peers. Nonetheless, the park remained the home of the White Sox for decades, and was the site of several classic moments, including 3 All-Star games, a World Series victory, and of course, a World Series defeat, the infamous Black Sox scandal. On the heels of 3 American League pennants in a row, Frank Navin, owner of the Detroit Tigers, believed the team could support a larger stadium. Unlike other ballparks of the time, this new stadium would be built atop the previous park, rather than having to find new grounds. He hired Osborne Engineering Company, a major force in ballpark design throughout the 20th century. The resulting stadium, eventually called Tiger Stadium, was not the architectural marvel that Scheib Park or Forbes Field were. It looked like a misshapen industrial building. It was pragmatic, it was intimate, it was Detroit. There was an enormous bleacher section filled with cheap seats, affordable by the city's blue-collar manufacturing workforce. For a time, there was a barbed wire fence separating those in the cheap seats from mingling with those in the expensive ones. The diamond was 4 degrees off center, so the foul lines were not parallel to the front edge of the grandstand, as in most other parks. Completed in 1912, it was constantly tinkered with over the years, with new sections being added and removed every so often. Nonetheless, Tiger Stadium was the site of 4 World Series victories and countless iconic moments. In 1911, after a decade of playing in a leased-out stadium, John Taylor, principal owner of the Boston Red Sox, decided to build a new ballpark. He chose a parcel of land that his father had purchased some months earlier for the building site. It was in a neighborhood called the Fens, named for the former marshland that once resided there. Taylor hired architect James McLaughlin, who'd never designed a stadium before and never would again. The resulting structure bore a brick facade that struck a delicate balance between the simplicity of Tiger Stadium and the grandeur of Scheib Park. Fenway Park was completed in just 4.5 months, though it would close just months later to accommodate more seats. The Sox had made the World Series in Fenway's inaugural season. In left field, a 37-foot 2-inch wall was built due to the odd dimensions of the lot. Initially crafted from wood, the wall was covered in tin and concrete in 1934 and hard plastic in 1976. It was originally covered with advertisements until being painted green in 1947, earning it the moniker the Green Monster. While Fenway Park is now considered a beloved icon of baseball, revered for its rich history and unique features, its reputation was not earned overnight. For the first few decades of its existence, it was in ill repair until its refurbishment in the 1930s. It has been the site of 8 World Series victories and 12 American League pennants. In 1912, Charles Ebbets, owner of the Brooklyn Trolley Dodgers, decided to build a large modern ballpark. He bought land in a neighborhood called Pigtown, later renowned as the birthplace of Babe Ruth. The resulting facade was charming, a cross between a civic building and a turn-of-the-century factory. It had double-hung windows with multiple square panes and dozens of Roman arches. It was the first ballpark with a dedicated parking garage. In the outfield, there was an ad for Schaefer beer. The H would light up if the play was a hit, or E if it was ruled an error. It also had a sign from a local tailor that said, "Hit sign, win suit." Charles Ebbets built an extravagant office for himself atop the ornate entry rotunda, but barely used it, instead preferring to sit on the edge of the field alongside fellow Brooklyn fans, who were some of the loudest and most passionate. Ebbets Field was the site of Jackie Robinson's first major league game, where he broke the color barrier. It was the site of the first televised game in Major League Baseball history. Ebbets Field saw 1 World Series victory, 2 years before the team folded and moved to Los Angeles. In 1914, the Chicago Whales built a stadium named Weeghman Park after the team's owner. When the franchise folded just 2 years later, Weeghman acquired a controlling interest in the Chicago Cubs alongside chewing gum magnate William Wrigley Jr. and moved the team to the new stadium. The stadium was designed by the same architect who had designed Comiskey Park just a year earlier. Wrigley Field would be a modern steel and concrete ballpark with a single-decked grandstand sweeping from right field to near the left field corner. It opened in 1914, but would not acquire its most distinguishing features until years later. In 1934, the red metal marquee sign was added which reads, "Wrigley Field, home of Chicago Cubs," and in 1937, when it added the center field bleachers, the hand-operated scoreboard, and the ivy covering the outfield wall. During the first few weeks of the baseball season, the ivy has not yet foliated, leaving only the winding vines and rugged brickwork of the outfield. But as the season unfolds, it flourishes into a verdant canopy, and come fall, it is tinged with red. Under the ground rules, if a ball gets stuck in the ivy, the batter is awarded 2 bases. Wrigley Field has been the site of numerous iconic moments, including Babe Ruth's apocryphal called shot, 7 National League pennants, and 1 World Series victory in 2016. The golden era of steel and concrete ballparks reached an epic climax with the construction of Yankee Stadium. The Yankees had played at the Polo Grounds alongside the New York Giants, but relations had soured over the years. The Giants wanted the Yankees out. With their newly acquired roster of all-stars from the Boston Red Sox, the Yankees were drawing huge attendance, further upsetting relations, resulting in an eviction notice. Most stadiums of the era seated around 30,000, but owners Huston and Rupert would build a stadium with twice that capacity. The outside of Yankee Stadium featured ornate terracotta relief designs of eagles clutching baseball bats. Inside was a 15-foot-tall decorative frieze stretching the length of the 3-tiered seating. It was the site of innumerable iconic moments. Don Larson's perfect game, 25 World Series titles, Reggie Jackson's 3 home runs on 3 consecutive pitches, and Lou Gehrig's retirement speech. Yankee Stadium was the capstone for an era of great ballparks. In the coming decades, few teams built new stadiums. Most teams continued to fiddle with seating or add various novelties, but none could outdo the Yankees in sheer extravagance. In 1929, the world plunged into a profound economic crisis known as the Great Depression. Families struggled to put food on the table as unemployment reached nearly 30%. This hardship affected America's pastime as well. Attendance at games plummeted by a staggering 40%, a decline that persisted until the conclusion of World War II. Owners slashed players' salaries by a quarter to keep their teams afloat. Major League Baseball found itself struggling to fill seats, resorting to stadium renovations and repairs rather than constructing new ballparks. Field dimensions were brought in to combat the dead ball era of 1900 to 1920, characterized by low-scoring games and a lack of home runs. In the era that followed, power sluggers like Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and Jimmy Fox reigned supreme. The league tried various ways to fill stands and revitalize people's passion for the game. In 1935, Cincinnati's Crosley Field hosted the first game of night baseball, and in 1936 the Hall of Fame was established in Cooperstown, New York. Meanwhile, in response to the growing economic crisis, President Franklin D. Roosevelt instituted work relief programs as part of his New Deal, including the Public Works Administration, which put the unemployed to work with major construction projects like dams, highways, public buildings, and even baseball stadiums. Dozens of new ballparks were constructed, mostly on high school and college campuses. The 1940s marked the first decade in Major League Baseball where no new stadiums were built. The country was in the throes of World War II. Baseball was on the decline and team owners continued to remodel their stadiums rather than build new ones. Nonetheless, the 1940s marked the integration of the Negro Leagues and the increased popularity of night baseball. As the war concluded, most teams set attendance records as the nation returned to normalcy. Between 1961 and 1977, there were 10 new franchises and 5 team relocations. As more and more teams relocated, cities began to do anything, including build new parks, just to keep them. The concession for owners was that these weren't ballparks, they were multi-purpose stadiums. These stadiums, though functional, struggled to cater to the diverse needs of baseball and football. This era of stadium design coincided with the trend of suburbanization, spurred by rising inner-city crime rates during the 1960s and 70s. Consequently, sports complexes were relocated to suburban areas, often along highways, but lacking convenient mass transit access. While multi-purpose stadiums were not entirely novel, historical antecedents such as Riverside Park in Rochester, New York, and the Shared Stadium in Cleveland highlighted the enduring challenge of balancing functionality with uniqueness. Criticisms of this era's stadiums often centered on their uniformity, lacking the distinctive features that characterize beloved venues like Fenway Park or Wrigley Field. After more than 2 decades without a Major League Baseball park, Milwaukee County Stadium opened in 1953 as one of the first multi-purpose stadiums, and the very first to be built with public money. The stadium was initially constructed for a minor league team unaffiliated with the present-day Milwaukee Brewers with the same name. Following its completion, the Boston Braves relocated to Milwaukee. As the automotive industry flourished, so too did the culture of tailgating. Portable grills and plastic coolers were mass-produced and mass-bought. This culminated in a spirited opening day on April 14, 1953, where fans from across Milwaukee convened to enjoy each other's company, fueled by hot dogs and beer, echoing the city's deep-rooted connection to the brewing industry, which lends its name to the current team. Decades later, the tradition of tailgating endures as a cherished aspect of Milwaukee's sports culture. Candlestick Park was a multi-purpose stadium that was home to both the San Francisco Giants and the 49ers for decades. It was famous for the shifting weather patterns of San Francisco Bay. Similarly, Shea Stadium is home to the New York Mets and New York Jets for years. However, no other stadium is more emblematic of the multi-purpose stadium era than the Houston Astrodome. In the 1960s and 70s, Houston was a city on the grow, driven by its role as the epicenter of the increasing important oil and gas business. Because everything is bigger in Texas, coupled with the absence of any semblance of zoning laws in Houston, the mayor commissioned the construction of the 208-foot tall and 710-foot wide Houston Astrodome, the world's first domed stadium. It was shared by the Houston Astros, the Houston Oilers, and the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. It welcomed the Houston Rockets for a time and was the site of the famous Battle of the Sexes tennis match between Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs. Most ballparks have been used for other events, but the Astrodome was a multi-purpose arena from the get-go. The architects wanted the stadium to somewhat resemble the great outdoors. The dome was made from translucent lucite panels to maximize sunlight, and the field was planted with natural grass. But the lucite panels focused the sun's rays, causing glare, making outfield balls hard to see. The panels were painted white, solving the glare problem, but causing the grass to die. They painted the grass green for a time, until it was replaced with synthetic turf, manufactured by Monsanto. For the first time, baseball was played on artificial grass, AstroTurf as it came to be called. Between innings, it was vacuumed by groundskeepers dressed as astronauts. But despite players' complaints regarding its strange texture and the abrasions they incurred from sliding, the artificial turf remained throughout the stadium's lifespan. The success of the Astrodome inspired other domed multi-purpose stadiums, including the Kingdome in Seattle, the Metrodome in Minneapolis, Rogers Center in Toronto, and Tropicana Field in Tampa Bay, the latter of which sat vacant for 8 years waiting for an MLB franchise. Angel Stadium, built in 1966, housed both the Los Angeles Angels and Rams, while Oakland Coliseum was home to both the Oakland Athletics and Raiders. However, 2 stadiums from this era, Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles and Kauffman Stadium in Kansas City, were 2 pure ballparks. They are some of the only surviving ballparks from this period. By the 1980s, Comiskey Park, home of the Chicago White Sox, was in disrepair. Owner Jerry Reinsdorf used the state of the park to manipulate uncertainty about the team's future. Facing enticements from Tampa Bay, where the newly built Tropicana Field awaited, Illinois rallied to retain the White Sox. Despite architect Philip Bess's proposal for an urban integrated stadium, HOK's design prevailed. Comiskey Park, the oldest park in Major League Baseball, was demolished and turned into a parking lot for use by the new Comiskey Park, later renamed Guaranteed Rate Field. Meanwhile, in Baltimore, the departure of the city's football team in 1984 instilled fears of losing the Orioles. Determined to secure their baseball franchise, Baltimore financed the construction of a new stadium, beginning in 1989. The resulting Camden Yards harkened back to the jewel box stadiums of old, bucking the trend of the cookie-cutter designs of the past 3 decades. Its facade seamlessly integrated with the cityscape, featuring architectural elements reminiscent of traditional structures, including elegant arches and exposed steel beams. The stadium's intimacy and asymmetry, coupled with modern amenities like luxury boxes, dining areas, and good locker rooms, celebrated baseball's heritage while embracing modern convenience. Both Guaranteed Rate Field and Camden Yards opened within a year of one another. They were both designed by HOK, and yet Camden Yards felt fresh and modern, while Guaranteed Rate Field immediately felt outdated, signaling the end of the multi-purpose era and heralding a new direction for ballpark design. Camden Yards became the blueprint, inspiring a wave of urban ballparks that embraced and celebrated local culture. Cleveland's Progressive Field followed suit, mirroring many of the successful elements of Camden Yards, with its backdrop of steel mills and smokestacks paying homage to the city's industrial heritage against the city skyline. Subsequent stadiums like PNC Park, Comerica Park, and Petco Park replicated this trend, offering breathtaking views of their city skylines, anchoring them within their communities. Over the ensuing decades, HOK spearheaded the retro revival that brought fans closer to the game. Iconic features like the frieze at the new Yankee Stadium were resurrected, marking a return to beloved stadium quirks. Yet these modern marvels aren't without their challenges. Unlike the early days where owners funded their own parks, like Scheib or Comiskey, today's ballparks rely heavily on public funding. Soaring construction and labor costs are passed on to the communities in which these parks reside. Amidst the excitement of grand openings and technological advancements, a sobering reality emerges. The disposability rate of these new parks presents a serious concern. Scheib Park, Forbes Field, and Crosley Field each lasted around 60 years. Comiskey Park, 80. Tiger Stadium and Yankee Stadium, almost 90. Fenway Park and Wrigley Field still stand to this day. In 1996, Turner Field was built for $209 million of public money. Yet less than 20 years later, the Atlanta Braves broke ground on Truist Park, a brand new $600 million stadium. The future of baseball parks lies at the intersection of progress and preservation, where the legacy of baseball is more than the structures that house it, but in the spirit of players and the communities they represent.